Imagine being tossed into the mud, labeled scrap, your blue skin covered in filth, holding a for sale board while your clan laughs. Until one human steps forward, sees your hidden glow, and instead of walking past, lifts your chin and calls you queen. Would you follow him? Or keep believing you're worthless? This is the story of a discarded alien girl whose worth was seen by a single human, changing both of their fates forever. They drag her out before dawn. A smear of mud clung to her knees as she stumbled forward, wrists bound behind her back with frayed rope. The morning air bit at her blue skin, still damp from last night's rain. Someone shoved a rough wooden board into her hands. For sale, it read in blocky human letters, painted in a harsh red that looked almost like blood. Her clan had decided she was no longer worth feeding. Too weak, too strange, a hybrid with features too soft to be a warrior and too defiant to be a servant. She had always known they looked at her as something between a defective tool and a bothersome pet, but she still hadn't believed they would toss her out like waste. She sat in the mud beside the road where traders and hunters passed. She shivered as cold clung to her shoulders, her half-shoulder shirt soaked and torn, revealing pale blue skin marred by shallow cuts and bruises. Her jeans, half intact, half ripped up to her thighs, were caked in mud. Her long hair, once silky and admired by the young ones, hung like heavy ropes down her back and across her face. She dared not wipe it away. She knew she had to look as presentable as possible if she wanted any chance of being chosen. But the mud kept dripping down her arms, turning her hands numb. Every passing merchant or traveler threw only one glance before moving on. She heard a few laugh, a few mutter insults. A group of human scavengers paused once, pointing and smirking, one of them gesturing to his friend as if mocking her shape and her helpless posture. She heard their boots squelch as they turned away, leaving her heart twisting with a sour ache. Hours passed. Her stomach ached with emptiness. It had been 2 days since she'd had proper food. She tried to keep her eyes down, but each time someone approached, her chest tightened with desperate hope. Each time they turned away, a piece of her spirit crumbled. Her people had always whispered that a hybrid had no place among them, no proper rank, no future. But she had once thought she could earn her place if she worked hard enough. Now she realized they had only been waiting for a moment of weakness to justify this betrayal. As dusk approached, the sky turned bruised purple. Her body trembled so hard she nearly dropped the sign. The mud had seeped through her jeans, sticking to her thighs, and her lips cracked from thirst. She almost wished she could disappear into the earth right there, that the mud would swallow her whole so she didn't have to face another sneer or another pitiful look. When she felt movement nearby, she forced herself to look up. She expected another trader to scold her for being in the way. Instead, she met a pair of eyes, human eyes, that didn't flinch. A middle-aged man stood there, slightly weather-worn, hair streaked with silver, his clothes simple but sturdy. He studied her face with a strange softness. For a heartbeat, she forgot the mud, the cold, the shame. She could only stare, her throat tightening. He crouched in front of her, boots sinking into the muck. His hand reached forward, not to yank the sign away or shove her aside. He lifted a strand of her muddy hair and tucked it behind her pointed ear. Her breath caught in her lungs. He smelled of smoke and wood, like a quiet campfire on a lonely night. His hand hovered at her cheek but didn't touch, an invitation instead of a command. No one had ever given her that choice before. "What's your name?" he asked, voice low but steady. She swallowed, unsure if she should answer. Her clan had given her no true name, only a task label, an insult really. But his eyes insisted on an answer. Sorry," she whispered, her voice rough as gravel. The name had once been hers in secret, repeated quietly to herself in the dark. His expression softened further, as if the syllables were precious. "Sorry," he repeated, tasting it gently. She felt warmth spread through her chest, painfully unfamiliar. She waited for him to sneer, to call her worthless. Instead, he shifted his weight, sighing as if deciding something heavy. He stood and turned to her clan's vendor, a wiry alien with scales, standing at a small makeshift counter. They discussed something she couldn't hear. The vendor gestured wildly, angry. The human only shook his head and pulled a small pouch from his coat. The metallic jingle of credits cut through the fading evening. After some snarling curses from the vendor, the man nodded and turned back. Her heart stumbled. He held out his hand to her, open, patient. Her fingers shook as she stared at it. She looked at the sign clutched in her other hand. She wanted to drop it but feared punishment. He gently took the sign, laid it in the mud, and squeezed her shaking hand. For the first time in her life, she felt solid ground under her spirit, as though his fingers pulled her from a pit she didn't know she had been falling into. She stumbled as she stood, her legs numb and clumsy. Without a word, he guided her away from the vendor, away from the open road. As they reached his small transport vehicle, he stopped and produced a folded blanket. She flinched as he draped it over her shoulders, expecting pain, expecting a blow. But his hands only adjusted it to shield her from the cold air. She pressed the fabric closer, trembling not from the cold anymore but from relief so sudden it nearly crushed her ribs. He opened the door, helped her inside, and offered her a canteen. The water was lukewarm but felt sweeter than any feast she had imagined. As they started moving, she curled into the seat, still watching him. Each breath felt too heavy, each beat of her heart too loud. "Why?" she croaked at last, unable to hold it in. He glanced at her, brows furrowing in gentle surprise. "Because you're not scrap," he said simply. "You're a person. You deserve better." The words slammed into her. They didn't fit into the shape of her self-loathing. She looked away, hugging the blanket tighter, tears stinging her eyes. She didn't know if she could believe him, but the softness in his voice made her want to try. The sky outside turned indigo. Trees blurred past, stars winked awake above them. He hummed softly to himself as he drove, an old earth melody she didn't recognize. Each note settled like warmth in her bones. When they reached a small, isolated shelter built into the edge of a forest, he parked and turned to her again. "Come on, sorry," he said. Her name again, like an anchor thrown to a drowning soul. She followed, her knees threatening to buckle. Inside, the shelter was simple: a cot, a small hearth, shelves stocked with preserved food and clothes. He helped her peel off the soaked shirt and jeans, moving slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to push him away. She didn't. Instead, she clutched the blanket tighter as he handed her a clean, oversized shirt. It smelled of soap and sun. When she dressed and looked at herself in the small metal mirror, she barely recognized the reflection. The blue skin still marked by bruises, hair still tangled, but something in her eyes had shifted. A hesitant light, as if a long-dead ember had caught a breeze. He set a bowl of hot stew in front of her and sat across, waiting. Each spoonful made her chest ache, not just from hunger but from the realization that someone had chosen her, fed her, called her by name. That night, as she lay on the cot, she listened to the crackling fire. He settled on a mat nearby, leaving her space, respect. When he noticed her staring, he only offered a quiet smile before closing his eyes. She held the blanket up to her chin, unable to stop the tears that dripped down her cheeks. Each tear was an old chain snapping free. For the first time, she felt the heavy mud on her skin begin to wash away, not by water, but by warmth she had never dared to imagine. Her mind whispered doubts. Surely he would grow tired of her, surely he would throw her away once he saw all her flaws. But each time the fear bubbled up, she remembered his steady hand, his gentle voice, the way he said her name. Sorry. A name she could finally start to believe was hers. She turned her head toward him in the soft glow of the fire. He slept peacefully, one arm curled under his head. She felt an unfamiliar pull in her chest, a small, fierce desire to protect this warmth, to hold it close, to never let it go. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight in this quiet, her spirit took its first real breath. And in that breath, she decided, if he had chosen to see her glow, she would learn to see it too. When Sori woke the next morning, her body felt heavy, as if she had sunk into the cot and become part of it. For a few long seconds, she didn't remember where she was. The warmth of the blanket, the gentle scent of soap, the quiet crackle of an old fire. Then it all returned in a rush, the mud, the sign, the man's hand holding hers. Her eyes flew open, and she turned her head sharply. The man sat at a small table by the window, repairing what looked like a small drone. His back was broad but relaxed, his movements slow and careful, as if he were mending something delicate rather than metal. Morning light fell across his hair, highlighting the silver strands she hadn't noticed before. He looked up when he sensed her stirring. His eyes brightened immediately, like sunlight breaking through early fog. "Morning, Sori," he said, his voice low and warm. That sound, her name, spoken as though it were the most natural thing in the world, made her throat tighten. She clutched the blanket to her chest, still unsure whether she should speak or hide. He gestured gently to a small bowl on the table. "I made something simple. You should eat." She hesitated, then slowly pushed herself upright. Every muscle complained, but she felt stronger than she had yesterday. She crossed the room on unsteady legs, the oversized shirt brushing her thighs, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. When she sat across from him, she flinched instinctively, bracing for harsh words or sudden grabs, but he only smiled again and pushed the bowl toward her. She stared down. It was a simple porridge, steam curling upward, carrying a soft, sweet smell. She picked up the spoon with shaking fingers, brought it to her lips, and nearly cried at the warmth that filled her. He watched, eyes gentle and patient. Halfway through the bowl, she paused and dared to look at him. "Why did you save me?" she whispered. Her voice still felt small, unused. He leaned back, expression thoughtful. When I saw you sitting there, you looked like someone who had never been given a real chance, he said. And I don't believe anyone should be thrown away. Not ever. Her eyes stung. She looked down, focusing on the spoon as if it were her only anchor. But I'm worthless. My clan always said so. I'm not pure, not strong enough, not obedient enough. He shook his head, leaning forward, his elbows on the table. You aren't worthless. You're alive. You feel, you think. You glow. At that, she looked up sharply. Her heart skipped. Glow? He nodded. When I first saw you, under all that mud and filth, I saw it. In your eyes. Something bright. You're more than what they said. You've just been taught to hide it. She stared, her fingers curling around the spoon so hard her knuckles paled. No one had ever spoken to her this way. Not even in her wildest dreams had she imagined someone would see her as something precious. They fell into silence. She finished her food slowly, every bite a small step toward believing she deserved to be fed at all. When she finally set the bowl down, he took it gently, as if it were fragile crystal. He stood stretching, and went to a shelf. He pulled out a long brush and some oil, then turned to her. Your hair, may I? She froze. Her long hair had always been a symbol of her difference, beautiful but inconvenient, a mark of her hybrid blood. Her clan had forced her to keep it long to shame her, never allowing her to cut or properly care for it. The idea that someone wanted to tend it felt too intimate, too impossible. She hesitated. Then slowly, she nodded. He motioned for her to sit on a low stool near the hearth. She lowered herself, heart pounding. He knelt behind her, dipping the brush in oil. His hands moved carefully, parting and untangling the matted strands. Each stroke was gentle, patient, as if he were soothing an animal that might bolt at any moment. As he worked, she felt something shift inside her, a warmth she didn't know she was capable of. Tears started sliding down her cheeks, silent and unstoppable. When his fingers brushed her scalp, she didn't flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, letting herself be held without chains. When he finished, he gathered the strands to one side, smoothing them so they shone in the dim light. He set the brush aside and rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. There, he murmured. Beautiful. She turned her head, meeting his gaze over her shoulder. For a heartbeat, they simply breathed together. Then she reached up, her fingers trembling, and covered his hand with her own. You really mean it, she whispered. He nodded once, firmly. Every word. The air between them seemed to hum. She shifted, slowly rising from the stool to stand before him. She hesitated only a moment before wrapping her arms around him, pressing her face into his chest. He didn't move at first, then his arms came around her, firm and safe. She felt his heartbeat, steady, strong. I don't know how to be what you see, she choked. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Then we'll learn together, he said. Step by step. She studied his face, the small lines around his eyes, the quiet strength in his jaw. And suddenly, she knew. This was not a master or a buyer. This was someone who had chosen to see her as a whole being. Someone who offered warmth instead of chains. The days that followed were quiet but full. He taught her to cook simple meals, to mend torn clothes, to tend the small garden he kept behind the shelter. He asked her questions, about her favorite sounds, the colors she liked, what she dreamed of when she still dared to dream. She began to laugh, shyly at first, then openly. When she did, he always stopped whatever he was doing, just to watch her, as if each laugh were a treasure. At night, she sometimes still woke shaking from old nightmares. But each time, she found his hand there, steady and warm, waiting for her to reach back. One evening, under a moonlit sky, he brought her to the small clearing behind the shelter. He pointed up. The stars glittered like distant jewels. She tilted her head back, eyes wide. They called me a worthless hybrid, she whispered, her voice trembling. But you make me feel like I'm made of those stars. He turned to her, his expression gentle but fierce. You are, he said simply. She swallowed hard. Then she reached for him, her fingers twining with his. This time, she didn't tremble. In that moment, Sori realized she had been wrong her entire life. She wasn't scrap, wasn't a stain on her clan's pride. She was something bright and unbreakable. And she was no longer alone. They stood there, hand in hand, the cool night wrapping around them like a blessing. The moonlight caressed her blue skin, making it glow softly, a radiant echo of the starlight above. And for the first time, she truly believed she was perfect.